Texas, 1874. The sky over Painted Creek hung dark as bruised fruit, threatening to split open and spill its fury across the valley. Gabriel Mackenzie yanked his hat lower, squinting at the boiling clouds that pressed down on the landscape. A man could disappear in weather like this, vanish without a trace. That thought had comforted him once. Now it chilled him worse than the coming storm. "Storm's bad, Miss Ruby. We ought to find shelter," he called to the young woman who rode slightly ahead. 22-year-old Ruby Mendez turned in her saddle, her honey-blonde hair escaping its pins to dance around her face. Her blue calico dress was dusty from the trail, but still brought out the striking blue of her eyes. "There's an old way station half a mile ahead," she replied, pointing toward a ridge. "We can wait it out there." Gabriel nodded, though unease prickled at his neck. 6 months of driving cattle had taught him to read the Texas sky like a book, and this one promised violence. Still, he kept his concerns to himself. No sense worrying her more than necessary. That was his way, bearing burdens alone, keeping others at arm's length. The frontier demanded it. At 26, Gabriel had already seen too much death to believe in happy endings. The war between the states had taken his father, and the harsh Texas plains had claimed his mother and younger brother through fever. Since then, he drifted from ranch to ranch, taking work where he could find it, never staying long enough to form attachments. Survival meant solitude. That was the rule of the frontier, the truth he'd built his life around. Until 3 weeks ago, when Ruby Mendez had arrived at the Circle M ranch where he worked. The daughter of the ranch owner's cousin, she'd come from St. Louis to teach at the newly established school in Painted Creek. Gabriel had been assigned to escort her into town after she finished her visit at the ranch. A simple enough task that had been complicated by delayed supply wagons and now this approaching tempest. "We'll make it before the worst hits," Gabriel assured her, though he wasn't certain. The first fat raindrops began to fall, pattering against his hat and shoulders as they urged their horses forward. Ruby glanced back at him with a small smile that reached her eyes, filled with a trust he hadn't earned and couldn't understand. It unsettled him more than the storm. People who trusted too easily got hurt out here. They died. He'd seen it happen over and over. The way station appeared as a dark silhouette against the turbulent sky, a small abandoned stagecoach stop consisting of a single room with a lean-to stable. They reached it just as the rain began to fall in earnest, the sky opening into sheets of water that struck the earth with startling force. "Quick, get the horses inside," Gabriel shouted over the sudden roar. Together they led the animals into the lean-to, working in practiced coordination that belied their short acquaintance. Gabriel found himself noticing the efficiency of her movements, the absence of complaint, the way she soothed her nervous mare with gentle words. Inside the way station, they found it dusty but sound, with a small stone fireplace and enough dry wood stacked in the corner to see them through. Gabriel set about starting a fire while Ruby wrung water from her skirt. "You've done this before," she observed as he coaxed flames from the kindling. "A time or two," he replied, not looking up, "been caught in worse spots." Alone, she sat on a wooden bench, pulling a blanket from her saddlebag to wrap around her shoulders. The question caught him off guard. Usually, he admitted after a moment, safer that way. Ruby studied him with those clear blue eyes. "I don't see how being alone in trouble is safer than having someone to help." "Depends on the someone," Gabriel said, more curtly than he intended. "Out here, people you rely on have a way of disappearing when you need them most. Or perhaps you leave before they have the chance to stay," she countered softly. The fire caught properly then, saving Gabriel from having to respond. The small room filled with warm light, pushing back against the storm's fury. Rain hammered the roof, and wind howled through the cracks in the walls, but inside, a fragile pocket of warmth took hold. They ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from their provisions. Gabriel found himself watching Ruby's hands as she moved, noting their strength and grace. She wasn't what he'd expected when told he'd be escorting a city woman to town. There was a resilience to her, a quiet determination that seemed to dismiss the harshness of frontier life as merely another challenge to overcome. "Tell me about the school," he said finally, to fill the silence that had grown between them. Her face brightened. "It's just getting established. 12 children enrolled so far, ages 6 to 14. The town council scraped together enough for books and slates." She leaned forward. "Some of these children have never had a proper education, Mr. Mackenzie. Can you imagine? In St. Louis, schooling is taken for granted, but here," she shook her head. "Here it's precious. Most folks here are focused on surviving. Gabriel pointed out. Reading and figures seem like luxuries. They're necessities, Ruby insisted. How else will these communities grow? How will these children build better lives than their parents had? Her passion transformed her face, making her even more beautiful. You really believe that, Gabriel said, surprised by the lack of naivety in her conviction. That things can get better. I do, she met his gaze steadily. And I think you want to believe it too, Mr. Mackenzie, despite your determination to expect the worst. The storm chose that moment to intensify, a tremendous crack of thunder shaking the small building. Ruby started instinctively reaching out. Her hand found Gabriel's arm, fingers curling around his wrist. The touch sent a jolt through him more powerful than the lightning outside. For a heartbeat they remained frozen, connected by that single point of contact. Then Gabriel pulled away, rising to check that the roof wasn't leaking. He needed distance from the warmth of her touch, from the dangerous feeling it stirred in him. The storm's setting in for the night, he said gruffly. We should get some rest, I'll take the floor. Ruby nodded, arranging her blanket on the rough wooden bench. Thank you for keeping me safe today, Mr. Mackenzie. Gabriel just nodded, settling himself against the wall with his blanket. Sleep would be impossible with her so near, with the memory of her touch still burning on his skin. But he closed his eyes anyway, listening to the rhythm of her breathing gradually softening as she drifted to sleep. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having spent its fury overnight. They set out early, the landscape transformed by the rain, vibrant greens pushing through the usually dusty terrain, wildflowers dotting the hillsides with splashes of color. It's beautiful, Ruby breathed, taking in the view from her saddle. Like the land has been reborn. Gabriel found himself seeing it through her eyes, not as harsh territory to be survived, but as something alive with possibility. The thought was as unsettling as it was compelling. They reached Painted Creek by mid-afternoon. The town had sprung up around a trading post less than 10 years ago, but already boasted a main street with a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and the newly constructed schoolhouse at its northern edge. Miss Mendez, a portly man in a black suit, hurried toward them as they rode up to the schoolhouse. We were beginning to worry when you didn't arrive yesterday. The storm delayed us, Mayor Harris, Ruby explained, dismounting. Fortunately, Mr. Mackenzie knew where to find shelter. The mayor turned to Gabriel with an appraising look. Mackenzie, you're one of old Jenkins' hands from Circle M. Yes, sir, Gabriel touched the brim of his hat politely. Just delivering Miss Mendez as requested. Well done, young man, the mayor turned back to Ruby. Miss Patterson has prepared a room for you above the mercantile. Let me help you get settled. Gabriel realized this was goodbye. He'd completed his task. There was no reason to linger. He should ride back to the ranch immediately. They'd be short-handed with the spring cattle drive approaching. Thank you for your escort, Mr. Mackenzie, Ruby said, turning to him with genuine warmth. I hope our paths cross again. Safe travels, Miss Mendez, he replied stiffly, tipping his hat. Good luck with your school. He turned his horse, resisting the urge to look back as he rode away. The sooner he put distance between himself and Ruby Mendez, the sooner he could forget the dangerous feeling she stirred in him. The frontier had no place for such sentiments. They were a distraction, a weakness he couldn't afford. 2 weeks later, Gabriel stood ankle-deep in mud, helping to extract a wagon that had become hopelessly mired on the road to town. The cattle drive preparations were in full swing, with supplies needing to be transported from Painted Creek. Another spring storm had left the roads treacherous, turning simple errands into day-long ordeals. Put your back into it, Mackenzie, the ranch foreman shouted as Gabriel and 3 other cowboys heaved against the wagon's side. With a great sucking sound, the wheels finally broke free of the mud's grip, lurching onto firmer ground. Get it loaded and back to the ranch before dark, the foreman instructed, already mounting his horse. I'm heading into town to telegraph about the trail conditions north of here. Gabriel nodded, wiping mud from his hands. We'll manage. Once the wagon was safely on its way with the other hands, Gabriel found himself with an unexpected free hour in town. He told himself it was practical to check on his horse's loose shoe at the blacksmith, but his feet carried him past the smithy toward the northern edge of town. The schoolhouse stood bright in the afternoon sun, freshly painted white with a small bell tower. Children's voices drifted through the open windows, reciting in unison. Gabriel slowed, then stopped altogether when he spotted Ruby through the window, moving between the rows of rough-hewn desks. She wore a simple blue dress, her blonde hair neatly pinned back. Her hands gestured expressively as she explained something to a young boy who looked up at her with complete attention. Even from outside, Gabriel could sense her energy, her commitment to these children. He started to turn away when the school door opened and Ruby emerged, leading the children outside for some kind of exercise. She spotted him immediately, her face lighting with recognition. "Mr. Mackenzie," she called, waving him over. "Children, continue with your counting games. I'll be right back." She approached him with a smile that made his chest tighten inexplicably. "What brings you to town? Not another storm rescue, I hope." "Supply run," he explained, suddenly conscious of the mud still clinging to his clothes. "Wagon got stuck on the way in." "The roads have been terrible," she agreed. "But the school is coming along wonderfully. Would you like to see inside?" Before he could formulate an excuse, a commotion from the children drew their attention. Two boys were engaged in a scuffle that had escalated beyond play. "James Foster, Thomas Webb," Ruby's voice carried clear authority as she strode toward them. "That is quite enough." The larger boy, perhaps 12, turned with defiance in his posture. He started it. "Called me stupid 'cause I can't do the sums." The smaller boy, tear-streaked but equally indignant, shot back, "You pushed me first." Ruby reached them, separating them with firm hands on their shoulders. "We do not solve disagreements with our fists in this school." "Thomas, everyone learns at different paces." "James, violence is never an acceptable response to words." Gabriel watched, impressed despite himself, as she transformed the confrontation into a lesson for all the children gathered around. Her method was firm but not harsh, demanding respect rather than fear. Within minutes, the boys were grudgingly apologizing to each other, and the class was returning inside. "I'm sorry about the interruption," Ruby said, returning to Gabriel's side. "Teaching involves more than just books and slates, it seems." "You handled them well," Gabriel observed. "Most men I know would have just whipped them both and been done with it." Ruby's expression sobered. "Violence teaches nothing but fear and more violence. These children deserve better lessons." She paused, studying him. "Will you be in town long?" "The children would benefit from hearing about your experiences on the ranch." The invitation caught him off guard. "I'm not much for talking, especially to children." "I think you'd be surprised," she said with a smile. "The offer stands should you change your mind." She glanced back at the schoolhouse. "I should return to class. It was good to see you, Mr. Mackenzie." "Gabriel," he said suddenly. "My name is Gabriel." Her smile deepened. "Gabriel, then. Good day." As she walked away, Gabriel felt a strange tension in his chest, as if something long dormant was struggling to awaken. He turned abruptly, heading back toward the center of town. The cattle drive would begin in less than a week. He had no business forming attachments he'd only have to break. Yet 3 days later, he found himself riding back to town, telling himself it was just to check if any mail had come for the ranch. The real reason became clear when he tied his horse outside the schoolhouse after classes had ended for the day. Ruby looked up from her desk, surprise and pleasure crossing her face when he appeared in the doorway. "Gabriel. I didn't expect to see you again so soon." He shifted uncomfortably, hat in hand. "Thought I might take you up on that offer, to talk to the children about ranching if it still stands." "Of course," she rose, gathering papers into neat stacks. "Would tomorrow morning suit, say around 9 o'clock? Gabriel cleared his throat. "Actually, I'm leaving on a cattle drive at dawn. We'll be gone 6 weeks or more, driving a herd up to Kansas." Oh, her face fell slightly, then brightened again. "Perhaps when you return then, the children would love it." An awkward silence fell between them. Gabriel knew he should leave, but found himself rooted to the spot, searching for words to prolong the moment. "Would you care to walk with me?" Ruby asked suddenly. "I need to deliver these papers to Mayor Harris, and it's a lovely evening." The sensible answer was no. He had preparations to make, supplies to check, 100 reasons to return to the ranch immediately. "I'd like that," he heard himself say instead. They walked side by side down the dusty main street, drawing curious glances from townspeople. Gabriel was acutely aware of how they must look together, the rough cowboy and the refined schoolteacher. Yet Ruby seemed entirely at ease, asking him thoughtful questions about the upcoming drive, the challenges it presented, the lands they would cross. "It sounds dangerous," she said as they reached the mayor's office. "It can be," Gabriel admitted. "Stampedes, river crossings, rustlers sometimes, but the pay is good." "And is that what drives you, the pay?" Her blue eyes searched his face with disconcerting perception. Gabriel looked away. "A man needs to earn his way." "But is earning all there is to life?" she pressed gently. "Don't you ever want something more permanent than moving from drive to drive, ranch to ranch?" The question struck too close to the confusion he'd been feeling since meeting her. "Permanence is a luxury some of us can't afford, Miss Mendez." "Ruby," she corrected softly, "and I think perhaps it's not a luxury, but a necessity we deny ourselves out of fear." Before Gabriel could respond, the mayor emerged from his office, breaking the moment between them. After a brief exchange about the school papers, Ruby turned back to Gabriel. "I should let you go prepare for your journey," she said, a hint of regret in her voice. "Be safe, Gabriel. I'll look forward to hearing your tales when you return." "Goodbye, Ruby," he replied, the name feeling intimate on his tongue. As he rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, Gabriel couldn't shake her words. A necessity we deny ourselves out of fear. Was that what he'd been doing all these years? Denying himself connection not because the frontier demanded it, but because he feared the pain that came with caring. The thought troubled him throughout the night and into the dawn as the cattle drive began. 3,000 head of longhorn cattle stretched before him, beginning their long journey north. The familiar routine should have been comforting, the dust, the constant movement, the simple clarity of purpose. Instead, Gabriel found his thoughts returning again and again to a white schoolhouse and blue eyes that seemed to see straight through him. By the time they reached the Kansas border, Gabriel had made a decision. When this drive was over, he'd return to Painted Creek, just to see how the school was progressing, he told himself. Just to keep a promise about speaking to the children. The drive ended successfully in Abilene, the cattle sold at good prices. The trail boss, pleased with their work, paid the men their wages with a bonus. Several cowboys immediately headed for the saloons to spend their hard-earned money, but Gabriel tucked his carefully away. He had other plans. The journey back to Texas seemed longer than the drive north, despite being unencumbered by cattle. When at last the familiar landscape of Painted Creek appeared on the horizon, Gabriel felt an unfamiliar tightness in his throat. 7 weeks had passed since he'd left. Would she even remember him? His first sign that something was wrong came when he rode past the general store. The owner, usually cheerful, gave him a solemn nod that raised the hairs on Gabriel's neck. "Mackenzie," the man called. "Heard you were on the Abilene Drive." "Good to see you back." "Thanks, Porter," Gabriel replied, reining in his horse. "Everything all right in town?" The storekeeper's face clouded. "Mostly, though we had some trouble while you were gone. That schoolteacher, Miss Mendez, she disappeared about 2 weeks back, during that big storm that blew through." Gabriel felt as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. "Disappeared? What do you mean, disappeared?" Porter sighed heavily. "She'd gone to visit the Miller family out by the creek. Their little girl's been sick. Storm hit while she was heading back to town. Search parties found her horse wandering, but no sign of her." He shook his head. "Mayor called off the search after 5 days. Figured she must have been swept away in the creek. It was running high after all that rain." Gabriel's mind reeled. He'd been driving cattle across Kansas while Ruby had vanished into a storm. The thought was unbearable. "Has anyone checked beyond the creek?" he demanded. "The North Ridge, the old trapper's cabin?" "Of course we looked," Porter said, slightly defensive. "Sheriff organized 3 search parties. Covered everything within 5 miles of where they found her horse." He paused, studying Gabriel's face. "You knew her well." Gabriel struggled to define what Ruby had been to him. Not quite a friend, certainly not a sweetheart, yet somehow essential in a way he was only now beginning to understand. "I was supposed to speak at her school when I returned." Porter nodded sympathetically. "She was a fine woman. Town's taking it hard, especially the children. School's closed for now." Gabriel mumbled something appropriate and rode on, his mind churning. He couldn't accept it, not Ruby, with her conviction that things could always improve, her belief in possibilities. The universe wouldn't be so cruel as to extinguish such light. Without conscious decision, he found himself riding toward the creek where she had last been seen. The recent storm had transformed the landscape, much as the earlier spring rain had done when he'd first escorted Ruby to town. The creek, usually gentle, had clearly been a torrent during the storm. Its banks were eroded, debris caught in the trees showing how high the water had risen. Gabriel dismounted, scanning the ground with the practiced eye of a tracker. The search parties would have obscured most signs, but perhaps there was something they'd missed. He moved methodically along the bank, working his way downstream from where Porter had indicated Ruby's horse was found. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, Gabriel was about to admit defeat when something caught his eye, a small patch of disturbed earth near the water's edge that looked different from the rest of the bank. Kneeling, he examined it closely. A footprint, a single clear footprint in a patch of mud that had somehow been protected from the rain and the searchers. It was small, the impression of a woman's boot, and it was facing not toward town as would be expected, but toward the river. Gabriel's pulse quickened. Why would Ruby have gone toward the river instead of away from it during a storm? It made no sense unless she hadn't been alone. Unless someone or something had driven her toward the water. He stood, eyes following the direction the footprint pointed. Across the river lay rough country, a series of rocky bluffs and dense woods that eventually led to Comanche territory. Few settlers ventured there, and the search parties would have focused on the more likely areas closer to town. Night was falling, but Gabriel couldn't bring himself to leave. Not with this single clue, this thread of possibility that Ruby might still be alive. He made a quick camp, determined to cross the river at first light and continue his search. Morning revealed the crossing would be challenging, but not impossible. The river had receded considerably since the storm, leaving a series of shallow rapids Gabriel could navigate on horseback. On the far side, the terrain became rugged quickly, with game trails winding through scrub and woodland. Gabriel followed his instincts, looking for any sign of human passage, broken twigs, disturbed stones, anything that might indicate someone had come this way. Hours passed with no success, the sun climbing higher in the sky, beating down mercilessly. Late in the afternoon, as Gabriel was beginning to doubt his judgment, he spotted a thin column of smoke rising above the trees perhaps a mile distant. It could be a trapper or a hunting party, but it was the first sign of human presence he'd seen all day. Approaching cautiously, Gabriel dismounted and secured his horse, proceeding on foot through the increasingly dense woods. The smoke led him to a small clearing where a crude cabin stood, obviously abandoned for years but recently occupied. A lean-to had been added to one side, and a small garden plot showed signs of recent tending. Gabriel drew his revolver and moved closer. Through a grimy window, he could make out a figure moving inside, too small to be a man. His heart hammered against his ribs as he approached the door. "Hello, the cabin," he called, standing to one side of the door, gun ready. Silence fell, then rustling from inside. A man's voice, rough with threat, responded, "Who's there?" "Name's Gabriel Mackenzie from Circle M Ranch," he answered, straining to hear any other movement inside. "I'm looking for a missing woman, schoolteacher from Painted Creek." More silence than a harsh laugh. "Ain't no women here, cowboy. Ride on if you value your skin." But in that moment, Gabriel heard something else, a muffled sound, quickly silenced. Someone else was in there, someone being prevented from speaking. "I think I'll come in and see for myself," Gabriel replied, his voice hardening. "I'm not leaving until I do." "Your funeral," the voice growled. The door burst open and a shot rang out, splintering the wood where Gabriel had been standing moments before. He'd anticipated the move, diving to the side and returning fire. His bullet found its mark. The man in the doorway cried out, clutching his shoulder as he stumbled backward into the cabin. Gabriel rushed forward, keeping his gun trained on the wounded man, a scraggly, bearded drifter he didn't recognize. And there, bound to a chair in the corner of the small room, a gag across her mouth but eyes blazing with recognition and hope, was Ruby. "Don't move," Gabriel ordered the man, quickly crossing to Ruby. With one hand, he removed her gag while keeping his gun steady. "Gabriel," she breathed, her voice hoarse, "how did you find me?" "Your footprint," he said, working at the ropes binding her wrists, "by the river. It was facing the wrong way." The drifter cursed, trying to staunch the blood flowing from his wound. "Should have killed her right away," he muttered. "Wasn't worth the trouble, no matter what that fancy watch fetched." Gabriel's vision narrowed with rage, but Ruby's newly freed hand on his arm centered him. "He forced me across the river during the storm," she explained quickly. "Robbed me, then kept me here when he realized I could identify him. He's been trading items from my satchel in some camp to the north." Keeping his gun trained on the drifter, Gabriel helped Ruby to her feet. She was thin and pale, with bruises on her arms, but otherwise appeared unharmed. "Can you ride?" he asked softly. She nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "I knew someone would come. I never lost hope." Something broke open in Gabriel's chest at her words, at the trust she still carried despite everything she had endured. This woman, who had faced the worst of the frontier and emerged with her spirit intact, who had never stopped believing that help would come. They bound the drifter securely and left him in the cabin. Gabriel would send the sheriff back for him once Ruby was safely in town. The journey back was slow, with Ruby riding double on Gabriel's horse, her arms wrapped around his waist. Neither spoke much, both processing the narrow margin by which tragedy had been averted. As they approached Painted Creek the following morning, Ruby stirred against his back. "What made you look for me?" she asked quietly. Everyone else had given up. Gabriel considered the question, searching for the truth. "I couldn't accept that you were gone," he finally said. "It didn't fit with everything I knew about you. About how you see the world." "And how do I see the world, Gabriel?" He guided the horse around a bend in the road, Painted Creek, appearing in the valley below, like it's full of possibilities instead of dangers. Like connections between people matter more than the risks they bring. He paused. "I think I needed to believe that could be true." Her arms tightened around him. "It is true, you're the proof of it." Their arrival in town caused a sensation. People emerged from shops and homes, shouting in disbelief and joy. The mayor was summoned, then the doctor. In the chaos, Gabriel found himself separated from Ruby, standing at the edge of the crowd as she was ushered toward the doctor's office. She glanced back once, her eyes finding his with a question in them, but Gabriel turned away. She was safe now, surrounded by people who cared for her. The danger was past. His role was finished. He rode back to the Circle M ranch that afternoon, throwing himself into work with a ferocity that concerned even the hardened ranch hands. For 2 weeks he avoided town entirely, volunteering for the most remote duties on the ranch's extensive property. But Ruby Mendez had never been one to leave matters unresolved. She arrived at the ranch on a sunny morning, driving a small buggy, dressed in a yellow dress that caught the sunlight. Gabriel was mending a fence in the south pasture when a ranch hand rode out to fetch him. "Schoolteacher's here asking for you," the young cowboy announced with a knowing grin. "Boss says to clean yourself up and not keep the lady waiting." Gabriel found her waiting on the ranch house porch, engaged in animated conversation with the ranch owner's wife. She rose when she saw him approach, her face lighting with a smile that made his steps falter. "Mr. Mackenzie," she greeted him formally, aware of their audience. "I hoped we might speak privately." They walked together toward a stand of cottonwoods that provided shade near the creek that gave the ranch its name. Gabriel was acutely conscious of his rough appearance, of the distance he'd tried to place between them. "You've been avoiding town," Ruby said once they were alone. It wasn't a question. Gabriel stared at the rippling water. "Seemed best." Best for whom? The directness of her question forced him to look at her. She'd recovered well from her ordeal. Her cheeks had regained their color, and her eyes were clear and steady on his. "For everyone," he said. "You're back where you belong, safe. The town needs you." "And what about what I need?" She asked quietly. The question hung between them, weighted with meaning Gabriel couldn't pretend to misunderstand. Still, old habits died hard. What could you possibly need from a drifting cowboy with nothing to his name but a saddle and a reputation for not staying put? He asked, more bitterly than he intended. Ruby stepped closer, fearless as always. "The truth, Gabriel, that's all I've ever needed from you." "The truth," he echoed, finding himself at a precipice. Behind him lay the safety of solitude, of expectations met and disappointments avoided. Ahead was unknown territory, mapped only by the certainty in Ruby's eyes. "The truth is I've spent my life believing that caring for people was a weakness I couldn't afford, that the frontier was no place for the failings you stir in me." He took a deep breath, forcing himself to continue. "When I heard you were missing, that you might be dead, I realized how wrong I'd been. The frontier is harsh, yes, dangerous, unforgiving. But facing it alone isn't strength, it's just another kind of surrender." Ruby's hand found his, her fingers warm and sure. "And now I know I can't go back to what I was before you." Gabriel turned to face her fully. "I don't have much to offer, Ruby, but whatever I am, whatever I have, it's yours if you want it." Her smile bloomed slowly, transforming her face. "That's a good start," she said. "But I think there's something specific you're still not saying." Gabriel laughed despite himself, recognizing the challenge in her eyes. "You won't make this easy, will you?" "Nothing worthwhile ever is," she replied, her eyes sparkling. "Especially not love." The word hung between them, at once terrifying and exhilarating. Gabriel took her hands in his, finding courage in her steady gaze. "I love you, Ruby Mendez," he said, the words feeling both strange and right on his tongue. "I think I started falling the moment you told me that being alone in trouble made no sense. I just didn't know how to recognize it." She stepped into his embrace then, her face tilting up to his. "I love you too, Gabriel Mackenzie, enough to wait while you figured it out." Their first kiss was gentle, a promise exchanged in the dappled shade of the cottonwoods. When they parted, Gabriel kept her close, marveling at the turn his life had taken. "What happens now?" he asked, realizing he had no template for this, no experience to draw from. Ruby smiled up at him. "Now we build something together. I have my school. You have skills any ranch would value. We find our place and we make it ours." "Just like that?" Gabriel asked, both hopeful and wary. "No," Ruby laughed. "Not just like that, with work and patience and probably some arguments along the way, but together. That's the important part." 6 months later, Gabriel stood in the doorway of their small house on the edge of Painted Creek, watching as Ruby arranged wildflowers in a jar on their kitchen table. The October sunshine slanted through the windows, catching the gold band on her left hand as she moved. They had been married in the town church 3 months earlier, with Ruby's students singing and the entire community in attendance. Gabriel had taken a permanent position as foreman at a neighboring ranch, close enough that he could return home each night. Their house, though modest, already felt like more of a home than any place Gabriel had known since childhood. Books lined the shelves Ruby had insisted they build, alongside the practical tools of their trades. On the wall hung a framed drawing from one of Ruby's students, a childish but recognizable portrait of their teacher and her cowboy husband. "Penny for your thoughts," Ruby said, catching him watching her. Gabriel crossed to her, taking her into his arms with the ease of a man who had discovered, to his ongoing amazement, that happiness was possible even on the harsh frontier. "I was thinking about footprints," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "about how a single step in an unexpected direction can change everything." Ruby leaned into him, her head fitting perfectly beneath his chin. "I'm glad you followed my footprint, Gabriel Mackenzie." "To the ends of the earth, Ruby Mackenzie," he promised. "Always." Outside, the Texas sun continued its slow arc across the sky, casting long shadows eastward. Inside, in the home they had built together, Gabriel and Ruby held fast to the truth they had discovered, that even in the wild heart of the frontier, love could take root and flourish, stronger than storms, more enduring than solitude, as vast and promising as the western horizon itself.